Hello, welcome to part 3 of my message for this week, and it's something that I call Vision Over Sight. In part 1, if you haven't watched the 2 previous parts before this, in part 1 we looked at a little bit of the backstory behind why I got to the point where I needed glasses and some of the experiences that I had once I received my glasses and correcting my vision. And then we also looked at what vision and sight mean as we go throughout our lives. Sight has humanly explanation, but vision has divine implication. So then in part 2, we looked at the start of Saul's conversion and how God made Saul blind because of the light that he was exposed to. Saul realized that he was so blind and so weak without God that he could not live without God in his life. So in part 3, we're going to be looking at right after Saul was on almost death. He was on the brink of death. He was about to die. So we're going to look at this time period that's just right after that. Right after he had not eaten or seen or drank for 3 days. Verse 10 in Acts 9, verse 10 says, "In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, 'Ananias!' 'Yes, Lord,' he responded. The Lord told him, 'Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying.'" So this confirms in this verse that the only thing that Saul could do after realizing that he was weak and blind without God's vision in his life, the only thing that he could do was pray. But God didn't show up in the way that he had before. God didn't show up with an overwhelming light. No, it goes on to say how God showed up this time. In verse 12, Jesus continues by saying, "In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." So when God starts to give you vision in your life, when God starts to expose you to what he has called into your life, then he'll slowly start to show you bits of your future. God will start to explain the meaning behind what he wants you to do in your future. And this is exactly what God did with Saul. God showed up in Saul's time of prayer. Once Saul has accepted that he's blind and weak without God, he was praying, and God, even though he did not show himself in the same way that he had before, he implanted upon Saul a vision. And it was a vision of this man, Ananias, coming, touching him, and restoring his vision. Verse 13, Ananias answered, "Lord, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go!" Isn't that what God tells us to do? God, after hearing everything that Ananias had said, saying, "You know, God, are you sure that I'm the person to be doing this? Are you sure that Saul's the person you want me to go talk to? I mean, he is known for killing all of your people and for persecuting all of your people. Are you sure that he's the one who's praying? Are you sure that he's the one?" And God just says, "Go." That's what God sometimes calls into our life And sometimes when God says go, we try and make excuses as to why we can't. But God doesn't call us to make excuses. God calls us to go when He calls us to go. When God tells you to do something, He doesn't want any other response than yes, Lord. Because God will make you go eventually. I mean, look at Jonah. Jonah got swallowed by the whale, spit up, all doing this stuff because Jonah avoided the call in his life that God was putting in his life. He didn't want to go the place that God wanted him to go, but God said, you're going to go. I know so many preachers who never intended to start off as preachers. They did not think when they were in college getting their degrees that they were one day going to be preaching at a church. But when God says go, God will make you go whether or not you want to. And whether or not you think that's what He's actually saying. So verse 15 continues to say, go. This man, I love the way that this is worded right here. This man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings, and before the people of Israel. Now, let's just look at that for a little bit. God calls this man who has been persecuting against him, who has been causing so much destruction in God's way. God says, He is my chosen instrument. He is my chosen route of communication. The people who you think can't possibly do what God is calling into their life because of what they've done in their past. It's on a dangerous route right there. If you can't look past people's pasts in order to see what God is calling now, they'll just go ahead and do what they got to do anyway. Because when verse 15 says, to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings, this is important because Ananias was Jewish. And Jewish people did not even want to talk to the Gentiles. So when God says, you know what, if none of the people that I have called previously are going to talk to these people, I'll use a Gentile, a Roman, somebody who is despised by the people who I have called in order to get the message across to them that they should have been doing this already. God doesn't care where you're from. God doesn't care about your past. God cares about what you are willing to do for Him. And Saul is one of the best examples of the willingness of what God expects from us. But God says He is my chosen instrument to take it before the people who you don't want to talk to, but then also the people of Israel. God says, if you, as a chosen people, are not going to communicate the word of God to everybody, I'll put somebody in there who will, who won't stop just at the Gentiles because they the people who you don't talk to. So they said, oh, I'll make up for your slack. No, I'll do you one better. The people of the Gentiles and the Jews will now be united under what Saul is preaching and what Saul is going to do by God's chosen instrument. The music that God makes breaks down those barriers. But it took Saul being exposed to this light. It took Saul being humbled and realizing that he's blind and that he's weak without God. And it took 3 days of prayer and not eating and only a vision from God. We don't see where this vision came in. So maybe it came early on, but then he had to wait 3 whole days. Maybe God didn't implant the vision on him until the 3rd day. And he went for 2.5 days without hearing anything from God. I bet you there was a point in there where Saul felt like God had forgotten him. And so many times that happens with us. Once God is trying to get you to realize and trying to put the vision into your life, once you realize that you're blind, it's uncomfortable. You don't want to be blind for that long. You don't want to be blind for 3 days. Saul didn't want to be blind for 3 days. I'm sure that he was craving a meal, that he was craving a drink, but he couldn't get it because he was so weak without God. So in part 4, we're going to look at how this passage wraps up. And I'm also going to share a very influential story of something that has happened to me in college. So I hope to see you back for part 4. I hope you've enjoyed the 3 parts up to this point. And I know part 4 will be just so eye-opening. And hopefully I can show you maybe the first steps that you have to take in order to get God to implant a vision in your life if you don't feel like he's already implanted one. So thank you, and I'll see you back for part 4.